Okay, tonight's session 2, is basically reasons to reincarnate, and it brings down that there are 5 reasons for reincarnation. It's brought down in Shar HaGilgulim. Just as a side point, you received reincarnation clarified, which is based upon Shar HaGilgulim, but there actually is a English translation of the Svarim itself. You can get through my website, or you can get also through Amazon.com. It's the whole Sefer translated, and it also comes in a PDF version if you want to see the whole story. It's very deep, very complicated, very complex, but the information is unbelievable. I've culled it from that Sefer. So there are 5 reasons for reincarnation, the most obvious being to rectify sins for which a person did not do tshuva before they died. The person will have to be tested with the same sin in the next life and not committed with. A person, you go through life, once upon a time, it was easier in some respects because when a person did a chet, the person did a sin, the response from Shemaim was pretty swift. It happened pretty quickly. A person spoke Lashon Hara, they got saras. First, on their house, then on their clothing, then on their body, and Hashem was interacting with us. And the person could go to a Navi, to a prophet, and say, why am I having this illness? The Ramban brings down in Parashat Bahar, talking about Shemitah, how in the times of the Nevi'im, you didn't have doctors to go to for cures because the cures were spiritual. The illnesses were physical, but the cures were spiritual, meaning that it happened for the reason of a chet. So a person went to a Navi and said, what did I do wrong? What was it that Hashem decided to afflict me with this thing? And the Navi would tell you the prescription, which was going to be spiritual. And then we lost that connection because we lost the prophets, and the physical illnesses required physical treatments, and Das was born Maccabi and Yuched and all the other, Kupat all around the world, because we had to go to doctors for physical treatments as well. So as a result of that, we don't pay attention that much to our averas, and we may not even know exactly what they are, because you have to first know what's wrong before you know that you've committed the wrong. So a person can easily go through life. Now in Yom Kippur, we tried to do vidui and charata, and certainly for the sins that we know, try to do things better next time. But it's very, very likely that a person will go to the grave with some of their sins not yet atoned for. And that will necessitate, obviously, reincarnation to fix up those affairs in the next lifetime. It's one of the hardest ways to come back because it means the person is going to be tested in the same area. If you're coming back to fix an avera, then a sin, then you will have to undergo the same type of situation, scenario, and this time not do the chet. So that's the first and most obvious reason for why a person reincarnates. The second one is to complete a mitzvah that has not yet been performed. Now, not every mitzvah is relevant to everybody at all times. For example, a person who's not born a Kohen can't do the mitzvahs of Kohanim, or a Levim. They can't do the mitzvahs of Levim, spoken about these Parashat last week and the week before that. And yet, somehow they're relevant to all of us, because, as I mentioned before in the past, that when Yaakov Avinu put the sticks in the ground to multiply the sheep in Parashat Vayetze, it says he was actually fulfilling the mitzvah to fulfill them, because mitzvahs are, first and foremost, eternal concepts. They are packaged the way they're packaged now, because that's what we require at this time to be able to reach that level, to somehow access that concept. The mitzvah is a portal to a different level of reality by wearing black leather boxes and black leather straps, expensive black leather boxes and black leather straps. The more expensive they are, the better they are. So that's the way we access the concept of tefillin. But Yaakov was able to access it by this action of actually multiplying the sheep, because all to focus us on God and connect us to God. And every mitzvah is designed in such a way that if you do it this way, and specifically with all the halachas and the way it's meant to be done, so you'll have tikun for yourself, and you'll bring tikun to the world. And I mentioned last week that a person can actually make the mitzvah of divorce. They can actually undergo a divorce as an ibur in somebody else's body. Why do they even have to? If they were somebody who was able to have a good marriage in every incarnation, so why should they have to go through that? Because the concept of divorce is eternal. It's just that's the way it looks right now in terms of the relationship, but apparently it has to do a lot with personal rectification. Do we need that concept? in some level, in some way. So shlucha kan, the idea of sending away the mother bird, right? There's a mitzvah. You come across a mother bird hovering over the eggs, and you shoot away to take the eggs. And it's a special mitzvah with a lot of Kabbalistic connotations and information to do with it. And not everyone gets the opportunity or even knows how to perform the mitzvah. They might even come across it, but not even recognize it because they don't know the mitzvah even exists. But that mitzvah is necessary to us on some level, in some way, for some aspect of tikun. So therefore, we may have to come back, not to fix up an avera. We didn't do the avera. We were able to keep our noses clean for the most part, or at least fix up, do tshuva for the averas and get kapara. But the certain mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs, we weren't able to fulfill. So therefore, we may have to come back for that. But because you're not coming back for a sin, you're coming back instead for a positive mitzvah to fulfill that you have not done before in the past. So you will not have as serious a spiritual struggle in the next life. It's a gift because God saw how hard you worked previously, how much you worked to keep yourself on the straight and narrow, but you didn't get a chance to do everything. So therefore, God will protect you to a large degree from certain averas, and you may have an easier go of it. And you see it in life. I mean, we can't calibrate this. We can't, see this. There's no Geiger counter to use to see who's here for the first time, the 10th time. Why is this person not struggling with the same mitzvah that I do? Some people have no problem when it comes to food. Some people have no problem when it comes to other desires in life. It's just not a problem. They're just not drawn to it. And we look at them like, whoa, I wish I could do that too. But they're on a different level. They've come back perhaps and working on something else altogether different. So therefore they don't have that same Yetzer Hara that we do now. That's the second reason. So the third reason is a person may not have to reincarnate for themselves. We're moving now into Ibur, right? And as a person has, in fact, fixed up all their averas, maybe they've been back 100 times already. After 100 times, you basically not much to fix up at that point in time. They have no more averas to do tshuva for. God's pleased with the report card, and they've done pretty much all the positive mitzvahs they need to do for the time being. Some, by the way, may not have to be done until the Messianic era, until Yemos Mashiach. So not every mitzvah has to be fulfilled. But for the most part, they're good. They don't have to reincarnate. They've done as much as they have to at this stage of history. So why come back? So it says because they can come back for somebody else. Now, instead of you being the one to receive the Ibur, you are the Ibur. You're coming back to help somebody else. There's a mitzvah that you did in your lifetime that you connected to that was easier for you. Getting up on time for minyan, no problem. You love doing it, right? Lighting Shabbos candles, no problem. You love doing it. Keeping Shabbos, keeping Yom Tov, these are things that you found very simple to do because you connected to them. And this poor person down here who's trying to, they really want to, they're pushing themselves, but they've got the Yetzer Hara and this limited spiritual ability, and they're davening to Hashem, please help me. How many times must I fail at this mitzvah? I really want to succeed. So God was, call the soul down, said, this person down there, they need your help. And you go into them as an Ibur to help them, to guide them, to direct them. And that's part of the heavenly help a person gets in this world when they really want to do mitzvahs sincerely and with all the koyach, all the strength that they have. And in a situation like that, aside from the fact you're doing a wonderful chesed for somebody else down in this world, is that every time you help this person do a mitzvah, you share in the reward. You don't take away from the reward. You get reward too. Just like they get reward for doing the mitzvah, you also get reward for helping them do the mitzvah. So this is a way actually for a soul to increase its portion in the world to come even after the person has died. It's a tremendous opportunity. What about the Averis? What if this person with the Ibur does a sin? Does the Ibur pay for that as well? No, because it has nothing to do with you. You came down to help this person. This person did not use the opportunity and went ahead and did a ched instead. Not only will they bear the sin alone, but they'll lose the Ibur. Because you didn't come down for that. The Ibur did not come down to be part of a sinner's life. The Ibur came down to be part of a person who wants to strive to become closer to Hashem and to perfect themselves and the world around them. So that's the third reason why a person can come down as an ibur. And also, it can, okay, that's fine. The fourth reason is to marry their soulmate. Because it's not a guarantee that every time a person's in this world, they're going to meet their soulmate. For different reasons. And lest the person say, well, what about me? What about, you should know. And it's brought down in Shar HaGilgulim that Aaron Cohen, even though Elisheva was such an Eishus Chayil, such a tzaddikus with tremendous yichus, the Gemara points out. She was connected to the sister of Nachshon ben Aminadav, and she had all kinds of connections to all kinds of people, and she married Aaron Cohen, and yet she was not his zivug. The souls that would, one of which was going to be the zivug of Aaron Cohen, would not come out until Yemot HaMashiach. So no matter how many times Aaron reincarnated, and we'll see he did, because it wasn't just him. Actually, Aaron was already a middle Gilgul. He came from someone else, which I'm not going to tell you right now until later on. But he was Magalgil a few times before he got his tikun, and he never married a zivug, not once the entire time, and won't until Yemos HaMashiach, when he comes back finally and is able to meet her. But other people, for the most part, probably have. At one point in time, married their zivug, married their soulmate in life. And if they haven't ever, then they may come back just to do that alone. Because at least at one time in the course of a person's reincarnations, they should be able to marry their zivug. Now, a person would then ask the question. It's always a touchy topic. But if you don't marry your zivug, then who do you marry? How's it possible to have shalom bayis if you don't? But the result, he addresses the issue and he brings it down that everybody comes from a certain futzah, group of souls, and there's a certain amount of uniformity and achdus amount amongst those souls, and it's possible for someone to not marry their zivug and still be able to have shalom bayis. Rabbi Akiva's zivug, his soulmate, was his first wife, Rachel, but she died before he did, years before he did, and he remarried. He married the wife of Turnus Rufus, who after her husband died, the big Russia, Turnus Rufus, after he died, the Roman anti-Semite, so she was Magar, she became a convert, and she married Rabbi Akiva, but she wasn't his soulmate. He had shalom bayis, they did their life together until one of them died, but his real soulmate was Rachel. That goes on all through history. Hashem works out the cheshbonos. Okay. The fifth reason to come back is to learn levels of pardes. Okay. What's pardes? I know that many of you have heard me speak about this before, but for those who haven't heard about it, the word pardes in Hebrew means orchard. If you go to an esrog pardes, lots of people, I don't know about this year with coronavirus, but in the past, when people wanted to buy an esrog, some people went right to the source. They go to some orchard somewhere in Eretz Israel where they grow esrogim, and they pick their own esrogim right off the tree. And that's what the word pardes means. It's an orchard, an apple orchard. It's a pardes. That's what the word means. But here, as he explains in Shar HaGilgulim, that the word pardes actually stands. It's an acronym. What we call in Hebrew a Roshei Tevos. A Roshei Tevos means head letters, meaning that each of the letters. I think that some people still have not muted their microphones. I try to mute everybody. But if your microphone is not muted, you should mute it, please, if you don't mind. But anyhow, it explains in Shar HaGilgulim, the word pardes actually stands for 4 words. The Pei, Reish, Dalet, Samech spells the word pardes, but the Pei stands for pshat, a Hebrew word that means simple. The Reish stands for remez, which means hint in Hebrew. The Dalet stands for drush, which means exegesis or to investigate, ledrosha, to investigate. That's the exegetical teachings of Torah, like Midrashim and Agadata and the Gemara, and all the stories behind the stories. Some of it also just technical, halachas we learn out by drush, by drush, and often you hear the word giving a drush. A rabbi gets up to give a drush because the drush basically is supposed to be the result of research that he's done to put together this drush. And the last letter, samech, stands for the word sod, which means secrets, which of course alludes to the mystical secret teachings of Torah, otherwise known as Kabbalah. So you have Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, 4 levels of learning Torah. These are the 4 levels that Torah can be learned on. Torah has 70 faces. A word can splinter, or a concept can splinter into 70 different facets, but the actual levels of Torah learning are 4. Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Let me give an example of how this works. Pshat is the simplest and the most obvious explanation of a concept, of a word, of a pasuk. For example, that the very first pasuk of the Torah is Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es ha'aretz. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. That's what it says. That's the simplest. You open any translation of the Chumash, that's the way they're going to translate it. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. And no one complains about that. No one has any tinus on that except for one problem. On the level of Remez, it means something else. Why? Because it turns out there should be a problem. Because if you look at the language, if you wanted to say in Hebrew, in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth, you'd use the word birishona. That's in the beginning. Right? In the beginning, birishona bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es ha'aretz. That's the proper way to say it. The Hebrew, the Torah says, Bereshis. Now, if a human was writing a book and used that word, it could be a mistake. It could get past the editors even, but not God. God's Torah is perfect. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. So if God used the word Bereshis and it seems to be wrong, it means that there's something else going on over here. So we can see that. The word Bereshis is obvious. You can see, this is not Berishon. It's spelled differently. And Bereshis, so like a hint. When you hint at somebody, you wink, for example, at someone, the other person, who you're holding this information from, can see the wink. And they, okay, what's going on over here? But they don't know the information. They have to investigate. But they know to investigate because they see the wink. So the fact I can see the word Bereshis is wrong means there's a hint. Something else is going on here. Rashi brings it up right away, and Rashi explains that that's the word Bereshis actually is 2 words, Bereshis. Not meant to be Bereshis, because that would be Bereshona. It's Bereshis, which literally means for the sake of Reshis. So what does Reshis means? Literally, Reshis means, the first. The first of something. So Rashi says, what is it? What's that talking about? And he brings verses, as Rashi does, to prove his point, that Reshis either refers to the Torah, because it's called Reshis, or the Jewish people who are called Reshis. And therefore, the verse is telling you on the level of Remez, on the level of hint, for the sake of Torah, God made the heavens and the earth, which is 100% true, as we spoke about in the past. Because God said to creation, if the Jewish people do not accept Torah, at Mount Sinai on the 6th of Sivan, 2448, 1330 BCE, then creation is hereby commanded to go back to null and void. So for the sake of Torah, the world was created. Otherwise, God wouldn't have made that condition. And for the sake of the Jewish people, because the Jewish people is just the nation that received the Torah and lived by the Torah. So it's one thing to give the Torah, but if no one's going to accept it and live by it, so what does that accomplish? So therefore, it's for the sake of the Jewish people who will accept the Torah, the creation was made. So we learn this pshat, this explanation, based upon Remez, based upon a hint. That's the idea of Remez, okay? Then you have the next level, Drush. And Drush means, as I said before, exegetical teachings. It's not something you're necessarily going to see by looking at the verse. There's no hint per se. Sometimes you get a sense that there's more going on here than meets the eye. Even Rashi, who says, for example, in Parashat Korach, I only come to give you the simple explanation of this verse. And yet he'll tell you this verse was one that's good to darshan out, to do drush on, to run it to the level of drush, because there's so much going on here that cannot be explained by the simple reading of the verses. You have to look at the medrash. Cain kills Hevel. What's going on over there? There's all kinds of things happening that we take for granted, but the medrash fills in. It's a story behind the story, or the story behind the story behind the story. Because, you have to understand these details, and God says, that's, you do that on your own. Here's the Torah. because if you put all those details in the Torah, you could never do Hagbah. Maybe pick it up, it'd be massive. That's not the only reason why it's like that. God shows exactly the Torah based upon the letters, the words to match his names. But we have to know this backward information. It's to be, drush, to investigate, to go looking for it. Sometimes it's not something you can come up with on your own. In fact, most of the time, the only validity a medrash has is that it's a tradition, going back to Moshe at Mount Sinai, or sometime after that, as far back as we can go. But it's a tradition. So medrash, for the most part, is something that gets handed down from generation to generation. And certainly, if you examine the Gemara, where another aspect of drush, which means, for example, you learn by inference. Words match each other, and therefore this teaches you that. But this is what the Gemara is doing, the Talmud is doing a lot of the time, using 13 principles. If you look in your art scroll Sidurim, or any Siddur for that matter, right before Shachris, right before Pazuka de Zimre, it mentions 13 principles, 13 exegetical principles that Rabbi Yishmael enumerated that we use as a way to learn out traditions that are in the written law but not obvious. Because everything is in the Torah on some level. It's not like a diary. We just happen to discover things as time goes on. And the Gemara says, for example, how do you know that you have to use money when you're making kedushin for marriage purposes? What's the source for that? Well, the source is Moshe at Mount Sinai. We know what the halacha is. It's part of the oral law. But now we want to know where the oral law is hinted to or alluded to, or there's a drush that explains it on the level of in the written law itself. So these are exegetical principles that are traditions that are handed down that we have to understand where they came from, how to use them. The final level is sod. The final level of sod is mystery, which is Kabbalah, and it is, of course, for the most part, off limits to most people because it's complicated. And a lot of people, you probably heard about people in Hollywood and different places in the world where they're learning Kabbalah. I'm pretty sure that what they're learning either it's not really the deepest and most complicated parts, or they have no idea what's flying. Because first of all, it's not just something you pick up and learn anybody. You have to prepare yourself. There's a lot of background information, but it has different levels. Primarily, Kabbalah is the spheres and the partsufim. These are the things that Hashem uses to run our world. And it covers, it could be an explanation. The Zohar, for example, one of the main sources of Kabbalah has in it different levels. So on one level, it explains the parsha on a Kabbalistic level. But then it has what's called the Medrash Nelam, or it has Sifnei Nusa, or a famous Idra Rabba, Idra Zuta. These are literally Meiser Merkava, the chariot that Yechezkel spoke about and Yeshaya spoke about, which is not clear. We read about these things on Shavuos, the maftir on Shavuos, to allude to the fact that Torah incorporates all of these things, not just Pshat, Remez, and Drush, but so too. We read about Meiser Merkava on Shavuos, and what's it mean? What's it talking about? So Kabbalah will explain that in details. That's what basically Kabbalah is dealing with, is Meiser Merkava, how Hashem made the world, all Pi Kabbalah, how the world works, all Pi Kabbalah, and if you learn it well enough and get to an advanced stage, how we can influence the world, all Pi Kabbalah. I mean, we are influencing it anyhow to some degree from just our mitzvahs and our Torah learning, but someone who understands how the system works can get a lot more out of it, have a much greater influence on the overall system, to the point that Chazal say that tzaddikim are gozer and Hashem is mekayim. Tzaddikim, righteous people, they make the decrees, and Hashem fulfills their decrees. How's that possible? They're not God. How can they know? But because they're so tuned into how the system works, that God gives them leeway to manipulate spheres and partsufim, to draw them and fix things. We were a lot better at this a long time ago, but certainly the potential does exist today. But even just the knowledge of what this Kabbalah has to say is very important in terms of understanding history right now, for example. Not the shir, in a couple, the next webinar, we'll be discussing the end of days, how we know we're there, and what does it mean in terms of the events of today. And it's Kabbalistic. It's very Kabbalistic, obviously. The truth is everything is Kabbalistic. In fact, just on the topic now, we'll just say that you have to understand, appreciate that, normally when you think about what's the most obvious explanation of a concept, and the least obvious, you think of Pshat, the simplest explanation of the verse or the word or the concept, as being the most accurate. And Kabbalah is like, elaborated and embellished. And the truth is, it's just the opposite, completely the opposite. If you look, it's like, Pshat, the simple explanation is like someone comes along and finds a road with potholes. He doesn't fix the potholes. He puts boards over them to smooth the ride. Rashi and the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra and all the various different commentaries who call themselves Pashtanim, they just come to explain, on a simple level. They're coming to smooth the journey, to make it easier to read Chumash without saying, what's this, what's this, what's this? But in order to be able to do that, you have to kind of ignore certain things. So you'll read certain Rashis that almost sound completely contrary to what you might think should be the case. But that is the smoothest transition, the smoothest way to explain it. Kabbalah is completely literal. Noach matzah chen b'nei Hashem. Noach found grace in the eyes of God, and that's why he was saved. Okay, yeah, I'm okay with that. You okay with that? Let's go fight this. Continue on. Noach was a good guy. God liked him. That's why God saved him. Not so simple. At a time of extreme din, judgment, God's judging the whole world. He's going to destroy his world with a massive flood and drown all kinds of people. And not everybody drowned. Who was drowning there was as guilty as the next person. There was probably even some nice people there who drowned at the same time. And the animals. It's not their fault. Why should they go too as well? And Noach is going to be saved because what? He has a nice smile because he says good morning when he comes in, or thank you if you help him out. What isn't he Noach matzah chen b'nei Hashem? Well, the expression literally means that someone likes you. What do you mean? What does it mean to find grace in someone's eyes? They look at you. I like that guy over there. It's like, Kabbalah says, no, it's much deeper than that. And that's the reason why Noach was saved. When Noach looked into the eyes of God, he found chen. He saw what chen was. And that directed him to lead a life that made him righteous enough that God would save him from the flood, this massive destruction. And we should know what that means, because this tells you, this one little verse that everyone just flies through, this one little verse tells you, if you want to survive divine judgment when it's severe, and it's literally in a destructive mood, so to speak, you need to know this verse. So what did Noach find? How did he do it? First of all, does God have eyes? No, God's not physical. That's the first thing we're told in Cheder, he's not physical. So when he looked into God's eyes. And what's this chen thing that's so popular? I mean, usually chen, you look at children, yeah, they got a chen. There's like something nice about them, something very attractive about them. Chen is one of the most sophisticated concepts. It's associated with Yosef, HaTzadik, who's one of our greatest heroes of all history. We're not going to go into that right now, but it's just a sample of how Kabbalah takes things literally and explains it literally, and when you're finished, it's like, wow, that's deep, that's profound, and that's life-changing. So those are the 4 levels of Torah, Pardes. So, the word Bereshis, next level, right? We saw that in Remez. Now Bereshis on the level of Drush is Barashis. The word itself is divided into 2 parts, Bara, which means he created, and the word Shis, which means 6 in Aramaic. So it says, when God made creation, at the moment he said Bereshis, Barashis, he made 6. 6 what? The 6 days of creation at that first moment. And not just the 6 days of creation, but the 6 millennia that followed at that first moment. That's what Barashis, that's the Drush. So that's the Drush, and what's the Kabbalah? So again, Barashis. But the Shis this time is not talking about the 6 days of creation, or the 6,000 years of history. It's talking about the 6 spheres of Chesed, Gilur, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, which run our 6,000 years of history. And they were created at that time that God said Bereshis. And all of this is true, and all built into one word. The Tikun Zohar has 70 different explanations, massive work on the first word Bereshis. And this is what the Rizal says, everybody's chayv to learn Torah on these levels. how am I supposed to do that? He says, if you have to hire a Rebbe, to pay a Rebbe to teach it to you, you have to do it. Does it apply to women the same as men? It doesn't seem to be. They don't have an obligation to learn Torah anyhow. It's a mitzvah reshus for women to learn Torah. It certainly applies to all men. I don't have the capacity. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. Whatever. That's all divine providence. But he says a person will have to come back to get those other levels of Torah. Rechai Vital, who was the chief Talmud of the Arizal, who wrote this material down in Shar HaGilgulim, was a Gilgul a few times over. The Arizal revealed it to him. But one of his earlier Gilgulim, he came back he began as Rav Vidal. He's Vital, Vidal. Who is Rav Vidal? He was the Magid Mishnah, a very important commentary on the Rambam's classic work, Yad Chazaka. He's famous. You open the Yad Chazaka, you'll see him on the side of the page there. So why did he have to come back? Because in the time of the Rambam, Kabbalah was very controversial. Until the Ramban, it wasn't even a fully accepted portion of Torah. Later on, it was proven clear. So he didn't want from it. He only dealt with the revealed parts of Torah at that time because he was very skeptical about Kabbalah. So therefore, he had to come back as Rabbi Chaim Vital later on to learn the Kabbalah he wouldn't learn back at the time he was the Magid Mishnah. That's an example. So what's the big deal? So why does it make a difference? So this is what the Rizal writes. He says, a person who only performs mitzvahs only merits the nefesh. If you recall from the diagram last week, the lowest level of soul. Mitzvahs are a big deal. We struggle with them. It's not easy to do them, and all of them, and at all times, right? But it says, anybody who performs mitzvahs, they only do mitzvahs, and we're talking about mitzvahs with the proper kavanah too, the proper intention. They only are able to achieve and acquire access to the level of so-called nefesh. If they make an additional effort to learn Torah, learning it, thinking about it, and constantly teaching the oral law, 2 parts of Torah, the written law, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moshe, the Sefer Torah we take out of the Aron HaKodesh on Monday, Thursdays, and Shabbos, and holidays, and Rosh Chodesh, right? And then there's the oral law. The oral law is the Talmud, the Shulchan Aruch, all the commentaries on that, all the other aspects of Torah that are not in the written law, right? That's the oral law. And they go hand in hand. They go together. You need the oral law to live by the written law. And if a person is constantly teaching the oral law, always learning it for its own sake, we call Torah lishma, meaning the person is learning it for the right reasons, not because I'm going to be called a Talmid Chacham one day, I'll get a better job. Okay, you might, that's not a bad thing either, but not for that reason. Not for covet, not to be honored, not to become famous, not to, just people should say, what a fantastic learner this person. No, you're doing it because you love Torah. It's Hashem's Torah, you love it, and you understand it's the best thing in the world for you. And you learn it for that reason, just to know it for its own sake. They're doing that. Then the person will merit the level of soul called Ruach. You need this to get the Ruach. And then he says, if the person makes additional effort and learn the secrets of Torah, they will also merit the neshama, the level up. That's a hugely high level. It's only the 3rd level, but it's way up there. Very high level of spiritual living, right? If they get that level, then the neshama will give off light from the Ruach, and he will add level to level. From that point onward, a person will just keep growing and growing and growing closer to Hashem, and that person may walk the face of the earth, but their head is in the clouds. They can function down here. You can talk to them. They may seem extremely down to earth, but the reality, they live above everything else. They're not part of this mundane reality. It's a phenomenal level of life to be on. And they achieve it, and they become wiser and wiser. And here's the point. They become what's called, according to the Arizal, an Adam Shalem. Become an Adam Shalom, complete person, regarding whom it says God made man in his image. The Torah says in Parashat Bereshit, chapter 1, verse 26, that we were made in the image of God. The Sforno explains that's a potential. We're not there yet. Certainly, look at a baby. A baby doesn't do anything. It's like, total, just a baby, and then grows up and adolescent, and but as you grow older, and you go from being selfish to selfless, then you will become more godly, more B'tzor. The goal, he says, is to reach this level called Adam Shalem. So he says, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit because to get to this point, this is a very important point that ties back to the Torah as well. He says, when a person only has a nefesh, that's the only level they have access to in their life and in their world, they only receive divine light from the name spelled Aleph Daled Nun Yud, Adonai. That's the name that we use. We dive into Hashem. We don't say Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? It's called the Shem Havaya, but we pronounce the other name. It's a less holy name, and that is one level of light that allows us not just to live, but to function spiritually and to achieve personal fulfillment. That's the goal. That's, you want a car? Fine. You want a house? 100%. Want to get married? Whatever. All these things are fantastic, right? But what we all want, and we all have access to, is personal fulfillment. And that's what we want. When we leave this world, the Gashmis is not going to matter to us at all, right? We're not going to be focused on that. All this we're going to be concerned about was, did I achieve it? What kind of shleimus, perfection was I able to get to in this incarnation? So he says you only get to one level of it. If they learn Torah for its own sake and they get the Ruach, they get access to a higher level of Hashem's name, a higher level of divine light, which is Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's the Shem Havai, which you don't pronounce it what's written. And if they go even higher and they learn the secrets of Torah, he says, and they merit the Neshama and they draw strength and divine life in the name Aleph Hey Yud Hey, which is pronounced Ekia, as Moshe found that in Parashat Shmos, when he says to God, whom shall I say is calling? When I go down to free the Jewish people, and Hashem says Ekia She'ekia, we see the name for the first time there, and that's one of these names. And a person gets this level, they're tremendously high up. Now, he says when they have this, something interesting happens. You have these three names of Hashem, and they each have a gematria. The first one is a gematria of 65. The second one is a gematria of 26. The third one is a gematria of 21. You add them all up, and they total 112. Big deal. What's 112? So he says, Yabok. The gematria of Yabok, Yud Beis Kuf, is 112. Well, what does Yabok mean? Well, if you open the Chumash, you go to Parshas V'Yishlach, where Yaakov Avinu has to confront Esav after coming back home from being at Lavan's house for 20 years. And he's on his way back, and he crosses the Yabok River, and that's when he struggles with the angel, and he has the name change. His name is changed from Yaakov to Yisrael. Where did it happen? By the Yabok, tributary. It's a tributary, a northern tributary off the Jordan River. And it seems completely insignificant other than the fact that's where it happened. Now, of course, that such a major thing should have happened historically there means, by definition, that's an important place. But what does Yabok mean? So he says Yabok is a gematria, Roshi Tevos, and it's equal to these three names combined together. So the Yabok itself symbolizes this shleimus. So when Yaakov was crossing the Yabok, he wasn't just crossing a physical river. He was becoming transformed, which is why he fought the angel of Esav and was able to prevail. And his name is transformed from Yaakov, which is an incomplete reality of the Jewish people, to Yisrael, which represents the idea of an Adam Shalem. And what does the Torah say after that? He comes to Shechem Shalem. And Rashi's bothered by this. What is this supposed to mean? So Rashi says, well, Shalem b'Toraso, Shalem b'Mano b'Gufo, right? Because he got injured and his money was intact, even though he gave all these gifts to Esav, and his Torah was intact, even though he lived with Lavan. Just to tell you, he came to, but why now? Why not before? Like, why at this point in time? There's still, so much going on. But Yaakov, he was doing this. This is what Yaakov was doing. So the word Yabok actually Kabbalistically comes to symbolize the process of going higher and higher to achieve our own personal level of what's called an Adam Shalem, Shleimus, perfection, which is a discussion to itself, which I won't get into right now because it has a lot of parts to it, but it's not a coincidence. I certainly don't think so, that if you look at Y2K, which was, it was also called the Millennium Bug, and this is going to sound way out there, far-fetched, but again, if you want to hear more, I'll give you the back information because there's a lot to say about Jewish history and what we're supposed to be accomplishing, and I'll tell you one part in 1 second. Y2K in Hebrew is Yud Beis Kuf, which spells the word Yabuk. And there's no question that was a turning point. History turned at that corner at that time. Came 9/11 after that, and all that's happened since then until this very day. And the reason why it's so significant is because history, as the Malbim points out, has always been about shedding our connection to Esav and becoming more like Yisrael. Yisrael is a hybrid. Yaakov is the twin brother of Esav. We can be just like Esav. We've had Jews who became popes even. And we can fight against the Jewish people and act just like the Gentiles. Yaakov can do that. Yisrael doesn't. It's a whole different darga. It's the idea of perfection. And how do we do that? By disconnecting ourselves, which is why Yaakov had to take the blessings and first buy the Bechor. He was stripping Esav of all his connection to God because Esav wasn't worthy. And as he absorbed it, he took Esav into him, which is why he had to marry Leah, who was destined for Esav. He had to marry both because now he was a hybrid, both Yaakov and Esav combined in one person, called Yisrael. So he married Ruch and Leah at the same time. And Yabuk symbolizes historically and Kabbalistically the transformation of a person. When you cross your own personal Yabuk river, so to speak, and you access these levels of names, then you achieve your own personal level of shleimus. So a person has to reincarnate over and over again in order to be able to go higher and higher up the rung. And just to point out, we mentioned before, there are 5 levels of soul: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chai, and yechida. So the 4 levels of Torah correspond to these 4 levels. Pshat corresponds to nefesh, and remez corresponds to the level of ruach, and then you have drush corresponding to the level of neshama, and chaya and sod go together. There's not one corresponding to Adam Kadmon, because on that level everything is unified. There's no specific section of Torah per se. It's all one reality. And so when a person learns, for example, Torah, Pshat, they're learning the lowest level, they're only affecting the nefesh. By definition, it only affects the nefesh. It's not going to change you that much. You learn Mishnah, which works by hints, and remez, corresponds to the level of Ruach. It's already higher level. If you're going to learn Gemara, it's going to affect your soul, if you're learning the proper way. If you're allowing it to impact you the way it's supposed to impact you. And there's the Talmud, there's also Talmudic thinking. Just to think like the Talmud too. When you learn something, you have an idea, you discuss something at the Shabbos table, you can have a Talmudic discussion without the Talmud being open, because it's a thought process designed to allow us to learn how to think like God. And then Sod, when you learn Sod, you're affecting the level called Chaya, much higher level up. And that's how Torah rectifies a person based upon the level of Torah that they're actually learning. So the last section, which we'll just go through briefly, it's not very long anyhow. So soul roots make all the difference in the world. We received one Torah for everyone, and it seems as if we're all expected to do the mitzvahs we are obligated to perform to the same level. And that's the way we look at things. We have a class full of 25 children, and we treat them all the same. Sometimes if you have an astute Rabbi or Morah who notices that this child struggles or excels even at something, then perhaps they might get special attention. But we put them all together and we say, here's the Torah. It's the same words for you and for you and for you. Everybody is being graded the same way, as if we're all equal. But it's not the way it works. Not by God, not by Torah education. And that's why Shlomo Melech wrote that every child has to be taught according to their own way, because your soul root makes a whole difference, all the difference in the world. If your soul root's down here, there's only a certain capacity to relate to Torah a certain way. If your soul root's up here, it's also a different story. And up here, it's all different. So there's no way that 2 people can relate to Torah and learn Torah the same way, in the same level. And you can't evaluate them according to the same system. It's a mistake, which is perhaps one of the reasons why so many children, especially in the last couple of generations, have decided, enough, it's not for me, and they've gone elsewhere instead. In truth, God's expectations of a person varies from soul to soul based upon its origin. A soul's capacity to receive divine light is based upon its point of origin in the spheres. Therefore, People relate to mitzvahs differently and would be rewarded or punished accordingly. You have to know that. Don't compare yourself to somebody else. Even spouses can't compare themselves, and children cannot be compared one to the other because everyone's different. The different soul source, the different nature. They will relate to Torah differently. The Malbim points out, I believe it was the Malbim, points out that there were 12 Shvatim, not one Shevet, 12 Shvatim. In Masa Mashiach, there'll be 13 even. But 12 Shvatim, and everybody had their own take. One Torah, same mitzvahs as everybody, but their own different relationship, how they saw it. And each of them was a facet, an aspect of Torah itself. That's important to know. It's important to be real with when you learn Torah, especially amongst other people. Not knowing from which level it so originates, we have to judge others to the side of merit, but ourselves capable of improvement. The Gemara brings down, it's a very important mitzvah, this idea of dan lechaschus, judging a person to the side of merit. We see people do things that are questionable. I would never do that. And they're seeing me do things going, I would never do that. But we look at it and we assume off the bat they're just like us. There's this assumption that's made that the same way I wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't say that, or I wouldn't think like that, they shouldn't either. There's something wrong with them. It's not necessarily true. It could just be the way they relate to Torah, mitzvahs. It could be a lack of education. So Gemara says only God really knows everything about a person, what their soul nature is like. Some souls come from the side of chesed, some souls come from the side of gevurah. Souls that come from the side of chesed will be naturally kind, naturally patient. They won't struggle with anger and things like that. Souls that come from the side of gevurah will be very disciplined, and it'll be admirable to how disciplined they are. But they also could be very impatient, quick-tempered. And God takes all of that into account, and we have to also as well. So he says that, generally speaking, we are here to use our strength to rectify our own weaknesses. We don't rectify the world by first fixing others. As Reish Lakish says in the Gemara, before you fix somebody else, first fix yourself. And that's not just good advice. That's actually the way the system works. That we're here, the Gemara says, for example, or the Mishnah says, that a person has to say to themselves, God made this world for me. This whole world was made for me. And the rabbis are quick to point out, no, it does not mean, therefore, you can walk into your neighbor's front lawn and take their lawnmower or anything, and say, this belongs to me. You can use it in the meantime, but it's mine. Not that everything belongs to me like that. No, halachically, for sure not the case. It means that I have to look at it as if I personally am responsible for the whole world as a partner with God. In creation, I have to look at it. I can't push out the responsibility and say, someone else is going to do it. But it's more than that. It also means that to understand that I have to act godly in as much as I have to take into account and realize that everybody's different. Everybody has different soul natures by definition, and they're all struggling in their own way. But more importantly, I'm here to use my strengths that I was given by Hashem to fix up my weaknesses. If that's my program, if that's my focus, if that's the direction I'm going, then not only will I rectify myself, I will find that I will end up rectifying others as well. And as we do that, the world itself becomes rectified. There's two approaches to life, and you see them taking place all the time in the world around us. And it's what's destroying the world right now. You can either change yourself or change others. We have to change. No one here is perfect. Most of us are struggling just to live according to a certain level of spiritual, greatness, if you can call it greatness, but trying to live up to a certain level. So a lot of people, they recognize that. They do what's called the cheshbon nefesh. They take accounting of their soul, where they're holding, and they design a program for themselves that use the Torah, Musar, whatever they have available to them, to rectify their mistakes, to rectify their weaknesses, and to go to a higher level of spirituality. And hopefully by doing that, they'll have a better impact on people around them, and they'll change as well. That's the Torah way. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't do that because it takes effort. The Fum Sara Agra, according to the effort, is the reward. That's what we're here to do. We're here to make that effort to change ourselves. What people tend to do instead is, I'm not working on myself. I'm not changing anything, but I am going to try and change you. And we're constantly trying to change others around us, which is not healthy and not positive, because we don't even know what they have to change. You should change yourself to make my life more comfortable and easy. We're all guilty of the same thing. It doesn't work. It just leads to destruction of society, as we're watching all around us today. So these are the reasons to reincarnate. We know what we have to do. It's very late in history. I'm not even so sure there's any more time. I mean, people being born today certainly are reincarnations, but if you're only 35, 45, 55, 65 years of age, God willing, you live until 80, 90, 100, there's a good chance there's no more time to reincarnate. We're that close to the end. So having said this and knowing what's ahead of us, we have to apply this material, these ideas, this information, and work on rectifying ourselves, and God willing, merit the divine help to expedite that process, because as the Gemara says, we only have to take the baby steps. Abala teher so. Someone just comes to purify themselves, to sanctify themselves a little bit, the Gemara says. That's all. Just work. I have decided I'm going to do this program. And you go in that direction, so they help them. Or they sanctify them a lot. You take a little bit, go forward that direction, and Shemaim comes back with tremendous assistance to make it that we can accomplish a lot more with a lot less in a lot less time. Have a great week. I look forward to seeing you next week for session 3.